In February, Arizona's State Farm Stadium hosted the 2023 Super Bowl. Nearly 65,000 people attended. The Super Bowl is probably the most important event in the sports world, at least in terms of revenue. 65,000 people might seem like a lot, but it pales in comparison to the chilling figure of 107,000 people who have lost their lives to drug overdoses in 2022 in the United States. Enough people to fill Michigan Stadium, the largest sports stadium in all of North America. Of those 107,000 people, 70,000 lost their lives to fentanyl. Currently, the main health threat facing the country, a social and health crisis that has gotten completely out of control.
3 May 2023, fentanyl-related deaths in the U.S. more than tripled in 5 years. According to data from the U.S. Center for Disease Control and Prevention, the rate of fentanyl-related drug overdose deaths increased from 5.7 per 100,000 people in 2016 to 21.6 per 100,000 in 2021.
70,000 deaths from fentanyl were enough for the issue to creep into President Biden's State of the Union address. It was one of the few moments when both Democrats and Republicans applauded the president.
So let's launch a major surge to stop fentanyl production and the sale and trafficking with more drug detection machines, inspection cargo, stop pills and powder at the border.
This has prompted a VisualPolitik to ask a few questions. How has fentanyl become so out of control? Who is producing it and how? How is it changing narcotics consumption patterns? How far could a crisis that many are already calling the silent pandemic really go? Well, keep watching until the end because in this video we're going to answer all of these questions. This is perhaps one of the videos that we would have preferred not to have to do, but at the same time it is one of the most important. Because if there is one thing that needs to be made clear, it is that we are not facing any trivial matter, nor something that is easily able to be controlled. And you know what? I think some of the data that we are going to see in this video will leave you completely cold. Let's take a look. We're not going to get technical because it is obviously not our field, but we can say that to date there are 3 major classes of opiate substances. Opium alkaloids such as morphine and codeine, semi-synthetic opioids such as heroin and oxycodone, and fully synthetic opioids such as pethidine and methadone. Well, fentanyl falls into the latter category as a completely synthetic opioid, and like almost all narcotics today, it has a much more noble and benevolent origin. Specifically, it was developed to be used, as it currently is, as a pain treatment for people diagnosed with some form of cancer or other serious and painful disease. We are talking about a substance that mimics the effect of morphine in the human body, but with one important difference. It is between 50 and 100 times more potent. As a consequence, there are up to 50 derivative drugs that can be produced from fentanyl, making its circulation tremendously widespread and complex. Perhaps that is why, in November of 2022, Anne Milgram, the DEA's highest authority, called fentanyl the deadliest narcotic ever in the United States.
Fentanyl is the deadliest pharmacological threat our nation has ever faced. Anne Milgram, DEA Director.
And take note, because so far, more than 287,000 people have already lost their lives to this substance, and there are more and more to come. But, VisualPolitik community, in order to fully understand its implications and clearly understand what we are talking about, let's start from the beginning.
The macabre fluke.
Fentanyl was first synthesized in 1960 by Paul Janssen, a Belgian chemist working for Janssen Pharmaceutica. Subsequently, it was marketed as an analgesic drug under a lot of different formats: a patch, a lollipop, a lozenge, a spray, or an intravenous dose. Keep this in mind because this will be important later. In any case, as early as the 1990s, the DEA discovered one of the first cases of domestically produced illicit fentanyl in the United States in Wichita, Kansas. From then on, the downward spiral has never stopped. Between 2000 and 2005, US authorities identified and dismantled several clandestine fentanyl laboratories across the country, which seemed to make it clear that the scale of fentanyl production was growing exponentially. In fact, in that same period, fatalities doubled. At that time, street fentanyl was mixed with heroin. So who's producing it? and where? Well, according to the US government, Mexico's largest drug trafficking groups, the new generation of Sinaloa and Jalisco, are the main culprits. These groups, as denounced in Washington, obtain the precursor chemicals needed to manufacture synthetic opioids from China, then manufacture the substance in secret laboratories in Mexico, and finally smuggle them into the US. As we will see in this video, it is probably their easiest business to carry out. Although the United States is also blaming China for turning a blind eye, according to some analysts, Beijing might even be comfortable with this situation. It could become their unique bargaining chip, but that is not even the full extent of the problem. As if that were not enough, at the beginning of this century, pharmaceutical companies began to promote the prescription of fentanyl and other opioid treatments using massive marketing campaigns. These campaigns were also aimed especially at low-income sectors. And the truth is that there was not much control in general on this matter, despite the fact that this substance was and is incredibly and terribly addictive.
21 October 2020, Purdue Pharma pleads guilty to criminal charges for opioid sales. The Justice Department announced an $8 billion settlement with the company.
In other words, the first decade of this century saw an explosive cocktail. On the one hand, the abuse of medical prescriptions for opioid treatment, and on the other hand, the growing use of fentanyl mixed with other narcotics in the illegal market. And so its use simply skyrocketed. Thus began a nightmare in what is basically turning the war on drugs into a joke. We have never seen anything quite like it. But why has it suddenly become so widespread? Why is it being consumed if it is known that it has so many risks? Who is it affecting the most? We're going to look at that now.
Low-cost death.
VisualPolitik community, the narcotics crisis has been so great that for 5 years now, it has become the main crisis that is causing the average life expectancy in the country to fall. Yep, you heard that correctly. This news item is from 2017.
22 December 2017, U.S. average life expectancy falls amid opioid crisis.
Of course, since then, things have only gotten worse. Much worse. On top of fentanyl was added the pandemic. And what's the result of that? Well, take a look at this graph. In it, you can see how average life expectancy has evolved since 2015. As you can see, in all cases, life expectancy decreased with the pandemic, but the United States is the only country where life expectancy falls in the face of the pandemic and falls again in 2021. This is the result of fentanyl, which if you think about it, is crazy. According to official data, overdose victims in the United States have been on the rise for more than 20 years, but fentanyl has been a real turning point. The fact that almost 70% of all fatalities are due to fentanyl makes it clear how this narcotic has changed everything. It has become a real tsunami, especially for younger people. Do you want a shattering fact? Fentanyl is behind 80% of the deaths of 15 to 24-year-olds. This substance is the biggest killer of young American females, and also those who are not young. Overdoses have already become the leading cause of death for Americans under the age of 45. Check this out. And that is without the consumption of the drug being as widespread as we might expect. Because no, fentanyl is not, fortunately, a mainstream narcotic. The problem is that its casualty record is not comparable to that of any other substance. For example, according to the US's National Forensic Laboratory Information System, in narcotics test reports, although it accounts for 70% of deaths, it only appears in just over 13% of positive tests. Can you imagine what would happen if its use were widespread? Let's stress once again, don't doubt this for a second. The further away you are from fentanyl, the better. Fentanyl has killed 5 times as many Americans as the entire Vietnam War, and it's getting worse. But I'm sure there's one question you're asking. How on earth can this substance be spreading so much and creating a tsunami in the United States? Well, it's mainly due to 3 factors. Firstly, because this substance is so potent that criminal groups can use 1 kilogram of it to produce approximately 1 million counterfeit pills that are then passed off as another type of hallucinogenic substance with a better reputation. Or it is even marketed and distributed mixed as oxycodone, a painkiller sold without a prescription.
The increase in fentanyl use reflects the potency of this substance and its low production costs. Traffickers have strong incentives to mix fentanyl with heroin and other street narcotics. Producing precise doses of fentanyl fentanyl also requires specialized equipment and expertise. Addressing the fentanyl threat to public health, 2017. The New England Journal of Medicine, Richard G. Frank, PhD, and Harold A. Pollack, PhD.
And not surprisingly, that brings us directly to the second factor. While a lethal dose of other substances may require more than 20 milligrams of product, in the case of fentanyl, the lethal dose is a mere 2 or 3 milligrams. So that means a single or a couple of counterfeit pills. And to top it all off, and this is the third reason that explains the enormous crisis, it is that it is tremendously cheap. For example, look at the prices estimated by several professors from different universities in the context of a joint research paper published in the US National Library of Medicine in 2020. As you can see in the distribution to small consumers, if we take into account that less quantity of product is needed for its enormous potency, in relative terms we are talking about a very cheap substance, and that makes it deadly. The cost of a lethal amount of fentanyl is less than 2 cents compared to more than $7 for other dangerous substances. So the point is that these three reasons explain why the drug is having such a devastating effect and why it is also affecting young people in particular. To recap, firstly, fentanyl is starting to be everywhere, and secondly, it is very addictive and the lethal dose is incredibly low, and thirdly, it's incredibly cheap as well. This is what makes it particularly dangerous, to the point that many experts are already talking about a silent pandemic, a pandemic that may even spread beyond the United States and escalate exponentially. Precisely for that reason, the DEA has made fentanyl its #1 target, but it is not even entirely clear about how to pursue the problem.
Criminal cartels in Mexico and China continue to act with impunity. We need greater enforcement powers and more accountability from our own government. Jim Rau, founder of Families Against Fentanyl.
But guess what? The process of international expansion may already have begun.
A silent pandemic on the verge of breaking out.
But of course, let's think about one aspect. If we are talking about a narcotic so cheap and so easy to transport, why would it stay in the United States? Because this could be a macro tsunami that is about to occur in the rest of the world as well. And perhaps particularly in the poorest regions. And guess what? At the moment, it looks like this wave could already be reaching Latin America. For example, in Mexico, AMLO has been saying since the beginning of the year that this substance is not produced in Mexico, but that this country only serves as a transit country. Now, he has had to acknowledge that there are laboratories in the country. Laboratories that, naturally, are not only going to produce for the United States. But Mexico is far from being the only country that has sounded the alarm.
To June 2023. This is how fentanyl is sold in Bogota. It is being combined with drugs for horses.
And we're not just talking about Latin America.
We must keep fentanyl out of Europe, urges Justice Minister.
Of course, he is referring to fentanyl used on the black market. In Europe, things are still under control. Lethal overdose victims across the European Union are little more than 6% of those recorded in the United States. But there is already some disturbing news.
Both Sweden and Finland have reported localized increases in fentanyl use and fentanyl-related deaths in recent years. Germany has documented worryingly high levels of fentanyl use among opioid users, evidenced by a high number of fentanyl-related deaths. European Monitoring Center for Drugs and Drug Addiction, EMCDDA.
Could the situation get as out of control in Europe as it has in the United States? Well, the truth is that this is a subject that is beginning to cause a great deal of concern. After all, this substance is extremely elusive.
It is difficult for law enforcement to detect fentanyl because, due to its high potency, it is trafficked in small quantities and is usually mixed with other drugs or sold under the name of another drug. Report on Drug Supply in the Americas 2022, Organization of American States.
In other words, it is easy to transport, very difficult to detect, and consumers do not even have to be aware that they are consuming it. Remember what we said earlier about the enormous variety of forms it can take? Well, exactly that. It can be camouflaged like no other substance. In this way, criminal groups can generate huge profits from small amounts that can be easily hidden in people's pockets or backpacks. It's a real nightmare. And the question is, will this macabre tsunami spread to the rest of the world? How on earth can it be stopped? Will the United States soon be able to overcome its titanic health crisis? You can leave us your thoughts and your comments in the answers below. And of course, stay aware of the enormous danger of this issue. The further away, the better. Stay safe. And now, if this video has been interesting for you, don't forget to like and subscribe to all of us here at VisualPolitik if you haven't done so already. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time.